Like, just because you had an abusive parent doesn't mean you're in an abusive relationship now. Throwing that out.
And you can change your mind anytime. I hit men now.
I wouldn't advertise that.
I will. No.
She's the WWE on her Final Girl Eat energy.
I am. Yeah. No, it's a bit. It's a bit. I'm joking. I will. No. Anyway, that said, no, I think that yes, you are correct that there is that triangle. You know, you've got your victims, you've got your perpetrators. You know, maybe what is the third one, like observer? Or...
No, the victim, the perpetrator, and the rescuer. The rescuer is the one who comes in to save the day, and I'm going to sweep you off your feet, and we're going to ride off into the sunset. And then once we're done rescuing, we loop back into the triangle. Oh, well, now I'm a victim. Now I'm a persecutor. It just goes round and round and round until you break the cycle.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So I would say, though, that sounds an awful lot like an archetype. And we've identified archetypes throughout, you know, like all of religion and all of those other, you know,
define archetype, though, because I heard archetype and my brain went somewhere else.
Really? Okay. So archetype, the book Hero of Many Faces comes to mind only because I think that's the text they give you in college for it. But in literary terminology, so including the Bible even, it is a character that repeats itself throughout literature, right? So you have maybe an ingenue, a hero, a reluctant hero. Star Wars does it beautifully, and that they have, they even will use archetypal colors in Star Wars. You know, like Luke changes his clothing from something light to dark. So the archetype would be the
character version of a motif.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Yes.
The motif is
you
the
have the
orange
basic idea of it. Yes, exactly. So, one archetype is a reluctant hero, an ingenue. Maybe, you know, there's, I can't even remember the sheer number of them, but it's a thick book. It's a hero with many faces, right? But those characters repeat themselves throughout literature, because literature in many ways is a reflection of human beings. But from the clinical perspective or the metaphysical perspective, you have those archetypes in both.
From a psychological perspective, there are archetypes in dysfunctional families where people play roles that are not necessarily intentional, but they're things like peacekeeper, scapegoat, hero child, lost child, the clown, the class clown. These are all like archetypes. That's where my brain went when you said that.
No, and you are not wrong.
Okay.
You are not wrong. Those kinds of descriptors are very archetypal. Absolutely. My thought process in this is more just to draw the parallel, because I would say I said ways you could recognize a monitoring spirit. You have gone a little bit into ways you could recognize someone who's a candle blower outer, right? You know, someone who is, I think you did more in the last episode, but do you want to elaborate just a little bit on that?
How to what?
How do you recognize someone who is blowing out your candle?
Are they one-upping you? Are they one-upping you is a good way. One-upping or one-downing. Like if my fridge broke, did your garage door break? Like, if I stub my toe, did you break your leg? Like,
right,
what is, if I have
strep throat, do you have to have an amputation, etc.? That makes sense.
That's kind of a one-upping or even a worse-offing.
Yeah, or one down. Or my favorite Brene Brown thing is actually from her special, which bears the same name as that book.
Call to Courage?
I know. I want to say it's the Atlas of the Heart special.
Oh,
maybe it isn't Call to Courage.
She did do an Atlas of the Heart special.
Yes. Yeah. It's really good. I cannot remember which one it's in. But that said, it's a little cartoon, and he comes by the hole, and someone's falling down in the hole, and they go, "Oh, that looks bad down there." Like, you know, she's explained the difference between like empathy and compassion and all of those things to people, and just kind of that monitoring spirit, that that looks uncomfortable kind of attitude, you know, maybe would be like how you would recognize.
Yes, but not solely on that, because what you said was sort of a reflection, and not all reflections are monitoring.
Interesting.
If I noticed that somebody was frustrated and I said, man, that sounds really frustrating, that's sometimes empathizing.
Sure. Yes. I think in her context, it was, I'm trying to remember if they were trying to show compassion. Do you recall?
I don't remember that actual clip.
I'll see if I can find it.
But the tone you used,
yes.
And maybe we can do tone policing as another topic another day, but the tone you used, I didn't know if you were going for condescending, but that looks uncomfortable.
That is kind of how that was. And it was a little along the lines of like, you know, I'm sure maybe you've heard the analogy before with addiction or depression where somebody's down in the hole and you could throw a ladder down, or maybe the addict jumps down in the hole with the other addict and helps them get themselves back out again.
No, I've never heard that.
So that is something that is
that like a 12-step thing?
It is. Oh. It is. It's something I've heard more than once in the room as kind of a way to show. And I don't mean this in a derogatory fashion, but oftentimes addiction can kind of rob you of your empathy. I think it's a way to kind of illustrate empathy.
Well, and the reason for that, I think, is the tunnel vision that the disease gives people. It makes it so focused on get the drug, use the drug, recover from the drug, get the drug, use the drug.
Well, recover. And the way it literally affects the brain and connections along those lines. I did not mean that in a derogatory fashion, and I certainly don't mean that addicts do not have empathy, but it can make empathy harder to access. And if you go into a situation where you're trying to learn spiritual principles, which is you know, the terminology for that, or values or a structure to help guide you in a different kind of life, accessing that empathy is very important.
I would argue that empathy is not natural. Like, it's not nature versus nurture. It's a combo, I think. Some people are born naturally with higher levels of empathy, and some of us are taught empathy in college because they're told if you don't learn empathy, you can't really be a good counselor. And so I had to learn empathy in college as a skill set. It is doable to learn.
I would say you learn to define your empathy because I've known you forever, and I don't think
so
you lack
been
empathy.
Empathetic.
You've always been empathetic. You learned how to define empathy. And in my experience as a mother, infants have empathy.
And I erased my RBF. I don't know if you remember, my focus face used to be like...
Oh, yes. People thought my sister was so scary.
And I didn't mean to look mean. I was just paying attention.
I mean, it worked out well for me. She wore a lot of black, too. But that's sad.
Now I've learned that the relaxed smile, like mirror work, people, to fix your face. Little smile. Nobody can tell you're smiling.
They gave us a mirror at the call center to smile into because they said they could hear your smile on the phone. But ever so slightly off topic on that one. I don't think that you had to learn empathy. I think you had to probably define it and maybe hone your skills in demonstrating it. I think you've always had it. And I would go further to postulate that probably most people from birth have it. I would imagine that some levels of diagnosed sociopath don't. But I think that it is more often nurture than nature that tends to rob people of their natural empathy, because I've cared for babies. Yeah, I've cared for babies my whole life. And you can have a baby that sees 6 inches from its face and they're 6 inches from your face and you start crying and they start crying. And I'm sorry, I do believe they have some shared empathy in that.
Do you know what mirror neurons are?
I do not.
Oh, a good topic for another time, because I don't have time to describe that right now.
Well, we'll definitely describe it another time. I wanted to get to the part here where, we figured out some ways to identify that from a clinical perspective, maybe from more of a metaphysical perspective, if one were inclined to believe that a monitoring spirit exists or an energy vampire in a truer form exists, ways you could guard yourself against that. From my perspective, I like to wear this. It makes me feel better. Okay.
I recommend emotional boundaries. And they can be however woo-woo you want them to be. So if you want to imagine yourself with a magical force field that's emanating from that oho, like protecting you from everyone else's energy, cool. If you want to picture it like in Star Trek, where they put up their invisible shields and nothing can penetrate that force field,
That's all the time we have for today on Therapy Unlocked. Please join us next time as we continue the conversation. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us as we continue the journey to unlock the mind, one conversation at a time.
I talk about today should be taken as medical, legal, or otherwise advice. This podcast is purely for education and amusement. That is it. That's the disclaimer.